Okay, welcome to the History and Approaches Psychology, Lecture 1, Unit 1 of AP Psychology. Let's take out the root words of psychology. The root words of psychology are psyche, meaning soul, and ology, meaning study of. Essentially, psychology is the study of the soul. What is psychology? The definition of psychology that you will see in your book is the following: the scientific study of behavior and mental processes. Now, psychology is a science because it makes verifiable and objective predictions, and it also deals with behavior on observable acts. Observable. Think about an observable act, an experiment that you can actually see done. However, it's also a social science because it deals with the following. It deals with mental processes. It means like storing and recalling, also dealing with feelings. Science, right here, does not like to deal with feelings. Feelings can't be observed. Feelings can't be observed. That's why it's considered a cross between psychology, is a cross between a science and a social science. It's also why you might see sometimes a science teacher is teaching psychology in some schools, but in most schools it is left up to the social studies. Frequently asked questions about psychology. How is psychology different from other social sciences? Psychology focuses on individual behavior. Other social sciences, say like sociology, deal with group behavior. For example, how is a group from Appalachians different from people that live in the Northeast, people that live in the Northwest, or even the Southwest? Where did it get its beginnings? Psychology got most of its beginnings from the study of philosophy or the study of knowledge. Also, it got its basis from physiology, the study of biological functions. Psychology is pretty much agreed on that it starts in 1879. It's born around 1879. Now, what psychology is not? Psychology is not mind reading. No Jedi mind tricks. We're not going to read each other's mind during this year. You also won't learn how to control someone else's mind. Also, keep in mind that I am not a therapist. I am not a psychologist. I am not a psychiatrist. I am a AP psychology teacher. That is it. Now, historical origins of psychology. Let's take a look at René Descartes. He believed that true knowledge comes through reasoning. Let me give you a quick history of René Descartes. He was a Frenchman, brilliant, top of his class. After he graduates, he gambles a lot, engages in a little bit of naughtiness. He then joins the army, but preferred isolation to hanging out with others. Probably should have thought about not joining the army, because last time I checked, a lot of people in the army, they do a lot of group work. He then joined, after he joined the army, he didn't really like it, didn't trust the people there, which is not a good thing. Then he pretty much believed that his truth is better than anyone else's truth. He leaves the army, got interested in geometry, and wanted to apply the rules of geometry to aspects of life with regards to axioms, those self-evident truths and theorems, logical connection between two axioms. From his work, he developed a doubting perspective. He believed that we are to doubt everything. How do I know this is blue? Can I trust my own perception? Can I trust my own eyes? He believed. He also believed, he came up with a quote. He said, "I think, therefore I am." He was left only with a doubting mind. Now, historical origins of psychology. You have guys like John Locke. If you're taking AP Gov this year or even next year, you heard a lot about John Locke. John Locke saw the mind as passive and receptive, with its main goal as sensing and perceiving. In John Locke's work, an essay concerning human understanding, he put forth the belief that the mind is receptive and passive. Its main goals are to sense and perceive the external worlds. He believed that we develop all knowledge from observation of things in the world. Thus, we are born in a state of tabula rasa. Tabula rasa, or what he means by like a blank slate. Everybody born blank, like a blank piece of paper, and you have no prior knowledge of anything. This is in direct contrast to the rationalists and Descartes. Locke saw morons and smart people and wondered what made the dumb people. If we have all this innate knowledge and reasoning skills, how are people dumb? Children aren't born with innate reasoning. Is it something they learn? Father of psychology, Wilhelm Wundt. He opens the first psychology lab in 1879, remember the year 1879, at the University of Leipzig, Germany. Psychology students from around the world came to study at his school. Now we come to what most historians consider the founding of psychology, Wilhelm Wundt and the magical year of 1879. Prior to this, though, Wundt had had a varied career in medicine, working with Robert Bunsen, the Bunsen burner fame, in physiology, working with Hermann Helmholtz and Johann Muller, and got interested in vision and perception of space. Several of his discoveries are important to his psychological emphasis. Auditory and visual stimuli are not experienced simultaneously. Separate acts of attention are required, and that there is a central attentional process that others had ignored. They had focused on the motor nerves that carried messages to the brain rather than the brain itself. His work focused on consciousness. Thus, he determined that it takes about 1/10 of a second to shift one's attention from the sound of a bell, auditory stimuli, to the position of a pendulum, visual stimuli. This led to Wundt to believe that we had a voluntary control process for mental events, i.e., selective attention. Also, the first schools of psychology. Now that we have psychology officially founded in 1879, we have schools of psychology, because as in the case with most everything in the world, there are different opinions regarding what psychology was and how it should be studied. Structuralism involves defining the structure of the objects of study before we study its function. To do this, self-reflective introspection was utilized. Thus, people were able to examine consciousness experience in terms of its elements of sensation and feeling. Titchener had highly trained individuals reduce all the mental contents into its most basic elements, while being totally devoid of imposing meaning of those views. He had participants define something, for example, an image. The experimenter would then work to break these images down into the most minute details, describing often just patches of light, color, shape, intensities, durations. From this, they understood that there are processes associated with intensities, lights, colors, etc. First, schools of psychology, again. William James is considered the father of American psychology. He was from an intellectual family, wealthy. His brother is Henry James, very famous American author. He studied at Harvard in chemistry, then studied with Agassiz, who totally disagreed with Darwin. He later split with Agassiz and sided with Darwin. He is known as a great teacher, wrote an extremely influential volume, The Principles of Psychology, that, while it's still somewhat difficult to read, is still very useful. James focused on functionalism. He studied how the conscious mind helps us to adapt to the changing environment. He was a proponent of the stream of consciousness method and felt that you couldn't look at it in discrete chunks as Titchener had done. Like the ancient Greeks, he thought that one could never experience the same thing twice. Every new experience is colored by the old and framed by past experiences. Think about hearing the same song multiple times. He also studied habit. Talked about how after enough repetitions, behaviors become hardwired and difficult to change. Let's take a look at the salt metaphor to compare functionalism and structuralism. Functionalism looks at salt and how you use it. Functionalism was founded by William James. It talks about how you use something. For example, you use salt to preserve food. It also makes food taste better. Structuralism, founded by Titchener, talks about the component parts of salt, what it's made of. It's made out of sodium. It's made out of chlorine. Now, other schools of psychology. So far, we've seen schools that are really period of dominance all to themselves. Now we'll start seeing the schools of thought and developing simultaneously, some of those which are still around and some of which have kind of faded through the years. The Gestalt perspective is really the best phrase, as the whole is greater than some of the parts. The main philosophy is that you shouldn't dissect an experience into separate elements to discover the truth, but instead look at the whole of the experience. They felt that dividing mental experiences up into individual elements isn't meaningful. We don't see patches of color, but instead we see people, we see cars, we see trees, etc. The focus here really is perception. For example, Max Wertheimer's 5 phenomenon. You can create an illusion that a light is moving from one location to another by flashing lights on and off at a certain rate. Now, this is Autumn by Giuseppe Arcambolo. How does this painting illustrate Gestalt psychology? If you just take a faraway look, it's a picture of a man. But when you look closer, it's fruit. It's fruits, it's vegetables, it's other little things here that make up a man, but it's individual parts. Now, psychology has been very open to women from very early on. One of the first prominent ones was Mary Whitton Calkins, studying of William James at Harvard. Her male classmates were very against her being there. They walked out of class even when she entered the room. Harvard didn't even give her a diploma when she was done with her program of study. However, through all of that, in 1905, she becomes president of the American Psychological Association. This was at a time that she couldn't even vote in the United States. Women wouldn't get to vote in the United States until 1919. So she was, well ahead of her game here. Another famous woman is Margaret Floyd Washburn, first woman to gain a PhD in psychology, studied animal behavior. She was president of APA in 1921. Think about it, 1921. But between 1909 and 1921, the APA, the American Psychological Association, had 2 women presidents. And by 1921, women had only had the right to vote for 2 years in the United States. So women really saw psychology as someplace where they could thrive. Psychological association societies, you have the APA, you have the British Psychological Association. The American Psychological Association was founded in 1892. It's the largest organization of psychology with 160,000 members worldwide, followed by the British Psychological Association. Psychology's subfields, research. You have biological, developmental, which means you're developing from like children all the way through adulthood, from birth to the grave, as I've had some students say. Psychology subfields applied. Clinical psychology, we'll go into more with clinical psychology here. Clinical, you think psychiatrists, psychologists. Psychology subfields applied. What they do. A clinical psychologist studies, assesses, and treats people with psychological disorders. Counseling helps people cope with academic, vocational, and marital challenges. Educational studies and helps individuals in school and educational settings. Industrial and / organizational studies and advises on behavior in the workplace. Where do psychologists work? 36% work in academic institutions, from colleges, from teaching there to even doing counseling. When you talk about psychologists, you will have sometimes a school psychologist that will be hired to give like testing for special needs and even gifted. 22% are clinical setting, private practice, think Dr. Phil there. 17% hospital and clinics. 5% school systems. Think guidance counselors and things like that. Clinical psychology versus psychiatry. A clinical psychologist is a PhD. Studies, assesses, and treats troubled people with therapy, day-to-day issues. When you think of a psychologist, think of Dr. Phil. Sorry for the D, the D right there. Think of Dr. Phil here. Dr. Phil is a psychologist. Psychiatrists, on the other hand, are medical doctors. They are a medical professional who treats like things with drugs and therapy to treat psychological disease patients, severe issues. A lot of people get psychiatry and psychiatrists and psychologists confused. Easiest way to figure that is medicine. A psychiatrist can give medicine. Therefore, psychiatrists have two eyes in them. When you think of a psychiatrist, they have two eyes or two little pills here. It's always instructed, if you want to know the difference between psychiatrist and psychologist, is a psychiatrist can give you pills. How do you know that? Because it has two extra pills. It has one for him and one for you. Nature versus nurture. This is a very, very controversial, or this is one not, I wouldn't say controversial. It's a very, it's the heart of psychology. Why we do what we do. Some psychologists think we do what we do because of nature. We're born the way we are. It's genetics, it's hormones explain that, it's body chemistry, it's biology. Some psychologists believe it is nurture. We're raised a certain way. It's the environment factors explain behavior, or our experiences guide our behavior. Are you the way you are because I was born that way, or because of your surroundings? Can I ever be like these people, or does nature give me limitations? I mean, for example, if you're, let's think about Michael Jordan. Let's say basketball players. You have to be tall to be a basketball player, or at least a good basketball player. You have Spud Webb in the 80s, who was, 5'7" or 5'8" to dunk the basketball, but that's a very, very rare thing. Genetics play a part in good basketball. If you're a very short person, I've always said that if you have two Shetland ponies and you breed two Shetland ponies, you're not going to come out with a Clydesdale. You're not going to come out with a Clydesdale. So genetics do play a part in that. Now, let's talk about one of the characters in psychology, Sigmund Freud, 1856, 1939. Austrian physician and his followers emphasize the importance of the unconscious mind and its effects on human behavior. Well, let's talk about the modern schools of psychology. When we move into one of the most controversial domains of psychology, Freud's psychodynamic theory. I should point out that while Freud was the originator of this domain, he was by no means the only psychologist who held to these beliefs. A number of people worked with him throughout the years and then started their own psychodynamic departments. Freud was born in the now Czech Republic and moved to Vienna when he was around 4. He studied there until the Nazis forced him to move to London in 1938, right before his death. He was one of only 8 children. He was one of 8 children, not only 8 children. His mom was 20 years younger than his dad. He had several half-brothers as well. He was a good student, studied medicine, specifically looking at localizing brain injuries. He set up a private practice and realized that he couldn't make a living just studying normal neurological cases, so he expanded his practice to treat hysterical patients. No one else would treat these patients, but he took it very seriously. From his work with these hysterical patients, his psychodynamic approach began to take shape. His basic model involves the conflict between one's conscious and unconscious in terms of which one is controlling thought and behavior. He focused a lot on motivation, mostly those involving sex and aggression. He felt that most mental illnesses involved because the conscious part of the brain wanted to address the problem the patient was having, while the unconscious feared the pain and wouldn't want to do it. Later theories involve free association, where everything the patient says has meaning, and dream analysis. Both of these haven't necessarily stood the test of time, but consciousness and unconscious framework is still utilized in some aspect of psychology today. Now, personality theory. He believed the id was the devil, and I want it now, impulsive desires. He believed also in a superego, or like the angel, represented your morals and how society expects you to behave. So a lot of people still see a lot of Freud's ideas. You just don't know they really know them. For example, if you believe that you have like an angel and a devil side, that is Freud. The angel means you represent your morals, how society expected you to behave. Like, I had a little angel on my shoulder telling me, how I should not say that. The ego is you. You're caught in the middle. You try to balance the needs of both the id and the superego. Freud's conception of the human psyche, it's an iceberg metaphor. This is the conscious mind. This is the preconscious. This is the unconscious. If you notice, above the waterline, the only thing you can really see is the conscious mind. Freud's methods, he used free association. The patient said everything that came to mind without attempting to produce logical or meaningful statements. He said the first thing come to your mind. Free association. Also, he would analyze dreams. The patient would share the content of the dreams with the understanding that dreams are messages from the unconscious. Freud put a lot of thought into dreams. Some psychologists do not put any thought at all in dreams. They believe dreams are just the byproduct of your mind needing to do something while you sleep. He also talked about case studies, intense observation of 1 or 2 patients at a time. Other beliefs of Freud. He believed in the Oedipus complex. He said son resents a father, loves his mother. Electra complex. Daughter resents mother, loves the father. We see this right here. You see this even today. You said, you see where people say a son can only love his mother. He'll be a mommy's boy. He'll love his mom. A lot of Freud's thinking has now been ingrained in our popular culture today. We also believe in a Freudian slip, which is a mistaken speech that occurs due to the interference of some unconscious wish, conflict, or train of thought. Penis envy. Women secretly want to be men. Sex and mothers. Everything is sexual. All problems can be traced to childhood, and it's a fault of the mother. This is one of, right here you can tell, these are very controversial beliefs. One of the things that Freud caught a lot of beef with people with is the over-sexualization of children. People kind of once they started looking into it more and more, they really kind of think, well, Freud is really kind of sexualizing children in a way that we don't think they have sexual thoughts. So you see a lot of people kind of distancing themselves from Freud as the years progressed. Here's some little cartoons. Freud's first slip. Reactions to Freud. Many supporters followed him. Many of his supporters followed him. They loved him. They later revised his theory, now called Neo-Freudians or New Freudians. A lot of people hated him. Spent their whole lives discrediting him. His own daughter, Anna, actually went against a lot of what he said regarding psychodynamic theory. Again, I told you, very controversial in the early 1900s, especially his views on sex. You're talking about the early 1900s, and he's talking about things like the Oedipus complex and sex, feelings. Those are things you didn't talk about in the early 1900s. So he's very, very controversial. Not very scientific either. Couldn't prove that the unconscious existed. Wasn't observable. He was more into the social part of psychology than the science part. Here's another few little cartoons here. Free association activity, want to skip that. With free association, what you would get is you would just come here and you get time. You would give me time, stamp, death, star, red, sky. You would just do those kind of things. First thing, and then Freud would tell you what you're really meaning by that. What's your subconscious really saying when you say time, stamp? Behaviorism. Behaviorism believes that all behavior is learned behavior. Focuses on observable acts. Science. This is sciencey. Said psychology should be a science. Should be scientific. Behaviorist perspective. Only cares about behaviors that get in the way of our living and attempts to change it. Focuses on observable things. For example, if you bit your fingernails when you were nervous, a behavioralist would not focus on calming you down, but rather focus on how to stop you from biting your nails, i.e. putting vinegar on them or some other thing that would make you not want to bite your fingernails because of the taste. Okay, behaviorism, pioneered by Ivan Pavlov. 1849, 1836, had a famous experiment where he rings a bell every time he fed some dogs. The dogs would then salivate to the food. This was all done by accident, by the way. Eventually, the dogs began to salivate when Pavlov rang the bell. Dogs have been conditioned or trained or taught that every time they heard the bell, they would get food. So they associated the bell with food and then would salivate. Came up with the idea of classical conditioning, or behavior is the product of prior experience. The little thing, Ivan Pavlov, please don't ring the bell, because what happens is you have dogs, they'll salivate, it'll be nasty. Stimulus, something that causes you to react. In classical conditioning, we're going to talk about stimulus. We're going to talk about an unconditioned response. Unconditioned is something you have not learned. It's natural. For example, salivating. Unconditioned stimulus, food would be an unconditioned stimulus. Condition is something you learned or trained or taught. Pavlov's experiment with the unconditioned stimulus was the food. The unconditioned response was salivation due to food. If you see food, if you've not eaten, you're going to salivate. You're going to start salivating because you want that food. The conditioned stimulus, or the trained stimulus, the trained cause, was the bell. And the trained response was when they heard the bell, the dogs would salivate. Before conditioning, food, unconditioned stimulus, equals salivation, unconditioned response. Bell, no response, has no clue. The bell plus food equals the unconditioned response, unconditioned stimuli. Salivation, unconditioned response. After conditioning, the bell is now the conditioned stimuli. Salivation is now the conditioned response. The dog has learned that when it hears the bell, it will get food. What Pavlov ended up doing is just ringing the bell. It didn't even give him food after a while. After they had learned that bell equals food, he could take the food away and then just ring the bell and the dog would salivate because it would think it's going to get food. Here's a little doggy, and then instead of feeding me, he'd ring a bell. And then we really find out what reason Pavlov's dog salivated. A little poodle over here in the window, little poodle. Now, Watson studied Freud. Not Freud. I'm sorry, he didn't study Freud. He studied Pavlov. And Watson had an idea. He said, if Pavlov's theory could work on dogs, could it work on humans? He said, could emotions like fear be conditioned? Watson looks a little scary here. He had a famous experiment called the Little Albert experiment. Little Albert, with his nurse Rosalie Rayner, who believed he had a kind of a thing for, he did the following in the Little Albert experiment. He created a loud sound was paired with fluffy objects and animals. He had a little baby. Now, you can't just get any little baby because he's going to be dealing with fear, and nobody really wants their child to get learn to be fearful of things. So where are you going to find a child that really nobody cares about? Well, you go to orphanages. So little Albert was an orphan. And back in the early part of the 20th century, they didn't really care about orphans. That's why they were orphans. And so Watson goes into the orphanage, gets a child, calls him, we'll call him Little Albert, and takes him into his lab. And at first he pairs him with the fluffy object, no problem. Then he pairs a loud noise that would start Albert making cry. Loud noise, fluffy, made him cry. Soon, just the fluffy objects, the animals would make the child cry. Now, usually you want to unlearn them from that, but the kind of interesting thing is, Albert was adopted before Watson could kind of unlearn that fear in him. He actually proved that fear could be learned. However, he also raised a lot of ethical problems because do you really want to be using you really want to be teaching people to fear? This is something that could not be done today because of the ethical issues. Unconditioned stimulus was loud noise, uh, things like that. We'll kind of go into this a little later. B.F. Skinner, huge influence on behaviorism. Introduced the idea of reinforcement and operant conditioning. Reinforcement. Reinforcement is positive behavior. Reinforcement is if you do something, I'm going to give you for good behavior. And operant conditions. Famous experiment with rats and pigeons. Skinner's legacy. Skinner argued behaviors were shaped by external influences instead of inner thoughts and feelings. Critics argued that Skinner's dehumanized people by neglecting their free will. Cognitive perspective. Cognitive equals thinking. Focuses on how we process, store, and use information, and how this information influences our thinking, language, problem solving, and creativity. Behavior is influenced by a variety of mental processes, including perceptions, memories, expectations. Jean Piaget, child psychologist, cognitive thinking. Cognitive perspective. How do you see the world? How did we learn to act sad or happy? Cognitive therapist attempts to change the way you think. You meet a girl, and you get rejected by the girl. Did you learn to be depressed? Or did you learn to get back on the horse and try again? There's many fish in the sea. Okay, humanistic psychology. Human nature is always evolving and self-directed. The environment and other outside forces simply serve as a background to our own individual growth. Believes that you need to search your full potential, self-actualization. It's more of a hierarchy of needs, like a pyramid shape. When we get into more of the developmental, we'll talk about Maslow and Rogers. If you're going into education, Maslow and Rogers are somebody you talk to about students reaching their needs. Maslow believed there was a hierarchy of needs, and the bottom, if you think about a pyramid, guys, this is a poorly drawn pyramid, people. At the bottom are going to be just basic needs, the basic needs for like survival. Top would be kind of like educational needs, and the very, very top here would be self-actualization, kind of like looking back at your life and saying, wow, I've had a really awesome life. I've done all these things. However, if you don't have all these things in here, kind of like a pyramid shape, kind of like building on the pyramid, Maslow believed you couldn't reach self-actualization. The humanistic perspective focuses on positive growth, attempts to see self-actualization. Therapists use active listening and unconditional positive regard. Mr. Rogers would have been a great humanistic therapist. How do you feel? Today is a great day to be you. You're the best you that you can be. Be the best you that you can be. Let's go back. This is actually Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you see like the psychological needs, the physiological needs, need to satisfy hunger, thirst, safety needs, need to feel that the world is organized and safe for you. Think about you right now as a high school student. Can you be esteemed? Can you have positive self-esteem if every night you're having to sleep in a different bed because you're homeless? Can you be able to pass an AP psychology test if you don't know where your next meal is coming from? Those are the kind of things that people that Maslow said that was needed to actually go up the ladder. And he saw it kind of an up the ladder to self-actualization. That should be our finalized goal. The biological perspective focuses on the impact of biology in our behavior. Studies how the brain, the nervous system, hormones, and genetics influence our behavior, usually referred to as psychobiologists. Neuroscience biological perspective focuses on how the physical brain and the body creates our emotions, memories, and sensory experiences. If you could not remember the names of your parents and went to a psychologist who adheres to neuroscience perspective, what might they say? Probably say something's wrong with your brain. Socio-culture perspective, studying the influence of cultural and ethnic similarities and difference on behavior and social functioning. For example, you would talk about the like in America, we smile a lot in America. You don't find that in a lot of cultures, especially Asian cultures. You don't find that in Asian cultures. Social culture perspective would want to know why. What is going on in say a culture in Japan, or even say in Korea, or in South Korea, or in China, that is different than, say, the United States. Social culture perspective. Now, evolutionary psychology. Charles Darwin, all behavior stems from survival of the fittest. Instinctual behavior. Think of reflexes when you think of this.